A fleeting moment of horror blanks out all rational thought, as the stalagmite that you just passed by suddenly sprouts out a single red blinking eye above a slobbering fanged mouth. Tendrils leap forth from its body and whip out in an eye blink, ready to snap the unwary for its next meal, its rocky hide proof against all but the strongest blows. This is a Roper, one of the most feared monsters in all of Dungeons & Dragons. This is one of those monsters that when it hits the battlefield, it radically changes the way combat will flow. Its tendrils will restrain everybody, and one by one, each character will die as the creature devours them, sometimes as there's nothing that you can do about it. These guys are rough, but you will be surprised to know that there's actually so much that you don't know about these creatures. This is going to be one of those videos where we're going to shatter your understanding of a monster, but before we do that, so that new D&D movie dropped out a trailer, and people are out there in the trenches discussing whether or not druids can turn into owlbears. If you're going to be fighting on the front lines of this holy argument war, you need to be protected, and that's where NordVPN comes into play. Hey look, DMing is a rough business that forces you to Google some really sketchy things. I'm out there Googling whether or not I can dissolve the body of an orc with acid, and I am wondering if now I'll be put up on some kind of list. And the thing is, I don't have to worry about it anymore because NordVPN protects me in the way that you wish incognito mode did. NordVPN is a program that functions like a shield on your internet. People cannot scan you or spy on you. Its threat protection blocks intrusive ads and web trackers. You download a file and then it inspects it for malware so that you don't have to be sweating every time someone on a forum drops a mysterious link and you really want to click it. It even scans your URLs and blocks malicious websites. On top of that, it lets you choose where you want the internet to think that you are, letting you pretend to be in Europe, America, or even Japan, which is really useful to circumvent all of those country blocks on content online. We've all been there. You're playing D&D and you got the perfect song for delving on that ancient elvish ruin, only to realize that the song that you wanted to play is blocked on your country. Well, not anymore. It just takes one click. You open the map, click on a location, and you'll be connected in seconds. It's that easy. Best thing, for those of you playing D&D online, which is something that we've all started doing recently, you need to realize that your internet providers love slowing down your internet when you stream, because it consumes a lot of it. Well, NordVPN prevents them from doing that. NordVPN encrypts all of your traffic so that your internet service provider cannot slow you down when you're streaming. If you want to take advantage of an incredible deal, click the link below on the video description or go to nordvpn.com/MrRex to get a 2-year plan with an enormous discount. Plus, you get 1 additional month completely for free. But that is only if you use my link, so go down into the video description and click the link. They even have a bundle deal going on right now where you can get NordVPN plus a cross-platform password manager and even encrypted cloud storage. Everything that you need is on that link in the description of this video. So thank you so much NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to it. Now, before we go deep, let's first check out the monster manual to see what they tell us. Alright, so it says here that a Roper has the appearance of a stalagmite or a stalactite, which often allows it to attack with surprise. It can move slowly using thousands of sticky cilia beneath its base. Alright, so the skin of the creature looks like rock, which allows it to hide in plain sight, and it holds itself on ceilings using sticky cilia. Okay, that must be some really powerful sticky cilia. That sounds really rough. To be able to hold a large creature like this? They don't tell you this here, by the way, on the 5th edition monster manual, but a Roper weighs exactly a metric ton. That is precisely 2,200 pounds. So if you're telling me that some sticky cilia is holding this beast, then there is something else that you're not telling me. That doesn't make any sense, but we can move on for now. Now, it says here that the Roper is an evolved, mature form of a piercer, which it shares its rock-like appearance and hunting tactics. Now, this part is weird, because it's actually new lore, or I should say, a kind of a destruction of the Roper lore, or I should say, of the piercer lore. So, the piercer is a monster that has already been around since 1st edition. It has its own lore, its own ecology, and we actually know a fair bit about it. We know habits, we know its biology, and it has established lore between many different books, including many Underdark books. It seems like they grabbed some parts of the real Piercer and then created an entirely new monster with some of its abilities and then just called it the larval form of the Roper, which again, it's already kind of weird because we do already know what the larval form of a Roper looks like, and it is not a Piercer. This has been lore for over 3 editions. They just, I don't know, they just decided to do something different, I guess. Now, I say this, but it's actually even trickier than this. The Roper that you see here is a different Roper from previous editions, so things are very muddled right now, but okay, I am getting way ahead of myself. Let's keep going for now. Alright, it says here that the Roper can hold still for long hours, shutting its single eye to look like nothing more than a mundane formation of rock. Okay, I already have an issue with that, but I need to keep going. The Roper then makes horrible guttural sounds as it reels in its struggling victims, drawing them close for the fatal bite of its stony teeth. Alright, this part is good, though they don't really tell you why it makes those guttural sounds. There's actually a reason and they omitted it here, but doesn't matter. A Roper can digest anything it eats with the exception of platinum, gemstones, and magic items, which can sometimes be retrieved from the creature's gizzard after death. That is good. A Roper's digestive juices are also very valuable, fetching a very high price from alchemists who use them as a solvent. This is very good. Now, weakening tendrils. Alright, so it says here that a Roper has 6 nubs set along its body, through which it extrudes sticky tendrils that bond to whatever they touch. Each tendril sends out hair-like growths that penetrate a creature's flesh and sap its strength, so the victim can struggle only weakly as the Roper reels it in. If a tendril is cut through or broken, the Roper produces a new one to replace it. Boy, this is another weird thing that they have done here, and actually my biggest pet peeve with this 5th edition entry. It has to do with the tendrils, but I don't want to cover it now. We haven't taken way too long on this. We'll get to it, just hold on. Now, here's a stat sheet of the monster. We can see that the natural armor of the Roper is absolutely incredible, which it makes sense since they describe it as basically having stone skin, though that doesn't really explain it all since we do know actually what the armor class of stone is, and it is not anywhere near close to 20, so it would be more like 17 or 18. So there must be something else going on here, but anyways, it moves really slow since it moves using those tiny cilias. It's a very physically strong monster with low intelligence. It is very interesting to me that they would give it actually low intelligence when it has had high intelligence throughout literally every single edition. I just don't know why they do these things. They just like change things for absolutely no reason. It can see very good, it can hide very good, and of course, compounded by its false appearance, which makes it look like a rock in a cavern. In here it says that you can attack its tendrils when they try to grab you. That makes sense, nothing wrong here. The Roper can climb walls and be upside down on a ceiling. That is fine too. Here we get the attacks, and again, nothing really too crazy other than the way that tendrils work, which I will talk about later on. But anyways, that is the 5th edition entry for the Roper, and overall I am really sad. So what they actually did here is they grabbed what was originally a sub-race of the Roper and made it into the main Roper for 5th edition, while giving it some of the components of the original main Roper, which is weird. You know, suffice it to say that we have a lot to cover today. This is, man, there's just so much to talk about. So let's talk about what they did not tell you about the Roper. Okay, so the first thing that I want to cover has to do with the fact that the Roper that we got in 5th edition is not actually a Roper, believe it or not. This here that you're seeing is in fact the Stow Roper, better known as a Stone Roper, which is a sub-race of the normal kinds of Ropers. Normal Ropers do not have hard, stony skins like these. This is in fact how a real Roper looks like. You will notice that it is naturally yellow in color and somewhat clay-like. So a Roper can change its color a little bit. Not a lot, but enough to look somewhat like stone. But yeah, its natural color is in fact yellow, and its eye, it's also supposed to be yellow, not red. So the actual texture of the skin of the Roper is still somewhat stone-like in that, you know, it is extremely hardy and very difficult to pierce, but, and this is a huge but but it is extremely malleable. A roper can in fact contort its form not just into any kind of stalactites or stalagmites, but in fact even into the shape of rocks on the ground, like a circular form, and it can even spread out, like flatten out its body along the ground as if it was melted in order to look like nothing more than a little bump on the cave floor. The store roper or stone roper cannot do this since its body is more like actual stone, so it is more limited in what shapes it can take, but it also becomes much more resistant to things like arrows and such, since its hide is of course much tougher. Now, that's not even the big thing, like my biggest complaint. The big thing has to do with the tentacles, in that they're actually not supposed to be tentacles, or at least not the actual roper. So, the stone roper does have tentacles, and they behave very similar to what the 5th edition Monster Manual described, except that they are actually a bit stronger. So the stone roper is not meant to weaken those it grabs with its tentacles. Instead, it's meant to paralyze them, sometimes even charm them. They're magical. The real roper works very differently. So the roper doesn't have tentacles. Instead, they're more like strands. Imagine like how Spider-Man can shoot like a webbing onto a person and then have that webbing get stuck on their chest, and then Spider-Man can just pull them towards them. That's effectively how a roper's strands are meant to work. The roper shoots them. They're not tentacles that can be manipulated and controlled. These strands are shot, and then once shot, the roper cannot control them. It can simply just pull them back onto its body, like retract them. These strands are extremely sticky, so instead of restricting a person by like wrapping around them, it instead gets stuck on their body. Now, these strands possess an extraordinarily potent poison. Now, they did mention this poison somewhat on the 5th edition entry as part of the weakening tendrils paragraph, but ironically, the stone roper doesn't have this. It's the real roper who does. So as you can see, this guy's made a whole mess of these creatures. It's all over the place. Anyways, a person that gets stuck with these strands has to resist the poison or become enfeebled. The target's strength is supposed to be lowered by like 2d8. It's supposed to be really bad. In earlier editions, it halved your entire strength. Now, more importantly, the glue that the strands possess, it's what's really important because it sort of signified the true strength of the monster. See, ropers nowadays are known for their hard skin and long tentacles, but thematically, what they were known for before was their glue, and that has been sort of forgotten in 5th edition. See, the reason these creatures can even walk along the ceiling is because of their extremely powerful glue that their bodies can produce. Their main body can secrete tons of this stuff by their cilia, and it is so powerful that it can hold metric tons without budging. The strands, on the other hand, can still hold a lot of the glue, but in lesser quantities, allowing for them to stick and pull creatures of up to 750 pounds of weight. So if you weigh more than 750 pounds, a roper cannot reel you in. That's important. The roper has a total of 6 glands scattered all across its body, which produces this magnificent glue, each of which can be sold for 25 gold pieces to an alchemist. As you can imagine, of course, the roper glue is so cool that it is actually one of the key ingredients for making the famous legendary item Sovereign Glue. It's kind of a big deal. Now, the last thing that I did want to mention when it comes to the normal roper versus the stone roper, it has to do with reproduction. So it's clear to me that they're using the stone roper as their 5th edition roper. And so, based on their inclusion of the piercer, it sounds like the traditional roper and the stone roper are meant to have completely different larval forms, which would make sense considering that they were always meant to be different variations of the same creature. So one thing to note is that ropers in general are carnivores, that they need meat to survive. It appears that the stone roper still possesses this requirement even in its larval form, which forces its larval form, the piercer, to find ways to obtain meat. And so what it does is it hangs on ceilings and then drops itself onto unsuspecting passerbys in order to one-hit kill them and then eat them. If the piercer misses his attack, then it's basically screwed. It can apparently produce a form of slime around its body that smells really bad, which tends to help prevent creatures from killing it if it misses its attack, but, it's not that helpful. Now, the larval form of the traditional roper is a bit different in that it doesn't require meat. Instead, it uses the Underdark's latent energy as sustenance. The lore is a little bit shifty as to how it works, but the idea is that it absorbs energy from the earth. Then in about 1 or 2 months, the creature grows enough to be able to attack and consume meat as a normal roper. But anyways, I think it's gonna be far more productive for us to talk about what the normal roper and the stone roper have in common, especially stuff that was left out of the monster manual, so let's just go ahead and do that. So all ropers reproduce asexually. They basically shed a part of their body material into the form of a seed. This seed grows a bit over time into what then would become the different larval forms of the roper. Ropers in general are fairly solitary creatures. They don't really need to interact much with those of their kind. It can happen when the food is very plentiful, and in those circumstances they do work together with other creatures, including other ropers, but generally speaking that doesn't really seem to be the case much underground. Food is just very rare below ground as it is overall. Now, this part about the ropers collaborating with others is fairly important, especially when you consider that ropers are actually meant to be very, very smart. In 1st and 2nd edition, they described them as having exceptional intelligence. In 3rd edition, they were dropped a bit to have above average intelligence. Same with 4th edition, where they had above average intelligence. In 5th edition, for some reason, they lowered them a lot to a 7. Which again doesn't make sense because these guys can't even speak. In 5th edition, they just make them look like they were just dumb monsters, which has never really been the case for ropers. In 3rd edition, they spoke Terran and Undercommon, which corroborates a lot of the lore in that they can organize with other creatures for food when they have to. Moving on though, the hard body of the ropers provides a fair amount of advantages and also some disadvantages to the creature. So first of all, the thick, rocky exterior that they have perfectly insulates the roper, meaning their body heat doesn't really escape their body, it maintains it inside. Now this does have a purpose. See, there are creatures that can see heat with their eyes. They would have infravision. Originally some races had infravision rather than dark vision, and so they could see heat in the dark. The roper has this incredible ability to be able to imitate the temperature of its surroundings to perfectly meld into it so that even creatures that would have infravision couldn't tell them apart from the cave walls. Now this also had the advantage of granting the roper immunity to lightning since, the body was perfectly insulated by its rocky skin, but also resistance to cold damage. However, since the body of the roper is designed to keep heat in and not let it out, it would have then vulnerability to fire damage because when it does take fire damage, that heat would stay in for way longer than normal. Now, on top of this, because of the hard, rocky exterior, the roper had an extremely limited sense of touch. All the sense of touch that they had in their bodies was really just confined mostly to the cilia, the little tiny legs that it uses to move. Quote, "The roper's thick skin does not permit much feeling to penetrate. In fact, it is theoretically possible to sneak up on a roper from behind and knock it lightly on the back of its head without the roper being aware of the transgression. To date, however, no one has been found willing to put this theory to the test." End quote. It is also worth pointing out that the roper has absolutely no sense of smell. It just cannot smell, it doesn't have the organs for that. Now, instead of a sense of smell, they have what we call echolocation, which to them proves way more useful. See, in the monster manual, if you remember, they mentioned that when the roper enters combat, it screams using its guttural sound. Well, that's exactly what that is. The way it works is the roper screams using a very specific pitch. The sound traverses around the caves and then bounces off the walls, eventually returning to the ears of the roper. This allows the roper to construct a mental version of its surroundings, which it then uses to figure out where creatures are so that it can snatch them and reel them in. This is of course very useful since it is very cumbersome for the roper to turn around, since again, the roper only has one single eye, and it also helps them catch creatures which might otherwise be very stealthy. Now, the caveat to the roper's echolocation, though, is that it has to be actively used. This is not like, tremor sense or blind sense or any other such senses that are always active. The roper has to very specifically screech for it to work. Now, some ropers do have screeches that bypass the auditory ranges of humanoids, like, dog whistles that could only be heard by some creatures and not by others, but not all of the ropers can do this. This is also worthy of note because most of the time a roper is not active. In fact, the monster manual didn't mention this at all, but ropers are actually usually in a form of trance, which functions somewhat like a form of hibernation. Ropers don't really get a lot of food very often on the caves, and so they basically have to find ways to conserve as much energy as possible, and so when fighting or eating, they enter a trance, and sometimes for days, where they just sit there super still until something that can be eaten shows up. Now, in the lore, they specified that the eye of the roper needs to be opened while they trance, because otherwise there's no way for the roper to be able to see when enemies show up. So what they do is they find a nice corner where they feel like they're perfectly camouflaged and where they have a good visual range of the entrance and exit of the cave they're in, and then they enter their trance. If something shows up within their ocular range, then they have the ability to instantaneously wake up. It is only then when they screech and activate their echolocation. They only do that when they enter combat, but yeah, this is why ropers do not sleep, since they're constantly trancing. And so that is the weakness of their echolocation. They can only activate it during combat. Now, a fully grown roper stands about 9 feet tall with a 3 to 4 foot base, which tapers to about 1 foot at its head. With this size, it can swallow creatures of up to medium size, using its strands or tentacles to help it move the creatures onto its mouth. Now, because it takes some effort to manipulate a dead creature onto its mouth, it can't really quite fully swallow a medium-sized creature during combat. It has to finish combat before it can fully eat them, but if you're a halfling, a gnome, or any other small-sized creature, yeah, these guys can basically just swallow you whole in a single turn, and if they do, keep in mind that you will be fully digested within half a day or so. A medium-sized creature takes about 1 full day for the roper to digest. Quote, "The roper's digestive processes are nothing short of incredible. Its powerful stomach acids are able to digest almost anything, from the softest flesh to the hardest metal. Two notable exceptions to this are platinum and gemstones, which the roper is unable to digest. For this reason, these substances are often found undigested inside a roper's stomach. However, they are put to good use, grinding up the roper's meal, much like the stones swallowed up by some birds for the same reason." End quote. Now, it is of course a very popular thing to do, to loot the gizzards of ropers, because adventurers know that they can always find things of value in there, either platinum coins or very precious gems. Sometimes even magical items which are immune to dissolving acids. The stomach acid of the roper is of such value that alchemists actually pay 4 gold pieces per ounce of it. So it is worth for me to note to you that a typical adult roper can supply 80 to 120 ounces of this very powerful acid. But this acid can only be stored within platinum vials because, otherwise the container itself will be corroded, of course. Now, speaking of looting the roper, it is funny that the lore also states that the single eye of the roper is considered a delicacy to eat, which is kind of funny. Now, the last and the most important thing to note about ropers, okay, if I need you to take something out of this video, this is it, is that biologists within the world of Dungeons & Dragons have come up with a conclusion that a group of ropers is called a cluster. A cluster of ropers. That is indeed official lore, you're welcome, and that is that. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, fellas, but before you go, please, I wanted to pimp out once again our PDF store, all of it written by me. We have Monster Classes 1 and 2, which is a collection of new Dungeons & Dragons classes from level 1 to level 20, where instead of playing a themed concept like a fighter or a wizard, you instead play a monster. I have grabbed lore from all of the editions and beyond and built really interesting classes based on monsters, so you can now play as ogres or dragons. It's really neat. There's also What Did I Tell You About Dragon Hordes, which is a collection of really useful info for looting dragons, and we don't mean just like looting their treasure, but like everything that you need to know about, skinning dragons, using their blood and bones as reagents for cool magic, and much, much more. All of it grabbed from the lore, so you know that you're getting some really good stuff. We also have a ton of draconic magic items in there, not just for players who wish to kill dragons, but for your draconic allies or draconic villains to use, like magic items exclusively to be used by dragons. You could even combine those magic items with our dragon class for monster classes too. I also made some draconic flavored subclasses, so you can play as a dragon hunting ranger, a dragon killing barbarian, and a warlock that made a pact with a great draconic demigod. The store is mrrex.shop, the link will be in the description, and you can also click the PDF images right below the video description. Any support is appreciated, thank you guys so much, but you know who I want to thank the most? Our amazing supporters over on Patreon. I would like to thank our Patreon supporters: Barry Mascan, 5e Magic Shop, Morgan Johnson, Rusty Rain, Dog Feeder, The Great Codini, Omega Scales, Terry Culp, Benjamin Bosters, Falky951, Ordoric, Sabim Kurshab, Thomas Hunt, Soulless Rider, Lost Crusaders, Stalia, Treb909, Steven, Trevor Hest, The Living Guild Pack, Describe, The Wizard's Vault, Herbert Johnson, James the Perverted, Shoddycast, Jesse Feliciano, Lucas Cyrek, Nactor Rashura, Akira, Baruch, John Harley, John the Wicked, Shane and Sam Skinner, Sir Ignatius Thunderblade, Warren Smith, Elisa Kestrel, Creasy3, Flame Black 200, Merton Games, Falcon Scientist, Houndsung Games, Richard Sawyer, Mobwrath Master of Secrets, Vector X-Man, and Guy Bromance for supporting me on Patreon at the $25 level. If you would like to support me as well, then please head on over to patreon.com/MrRex to support. Guys, thank you so much for watching, thank you so much for being here, and I will see you all next time. We're finally going to talk about Yuan-Ti, so stay hyped.